Welcome to Not Suitable for Work. I'm your host, Peter C. Diamond. You think your office is nuts? Wait until you hear some of these stories.
It's a story I tell people as a cautionary tale of what not to do in a pressure-filled situation.
And there's nothing like making a joke and looking at a room full of people who, are just stone-faced, and they know that you blew it.
What about our professional dynamic has given you license to act in this way?
I realized she's kind of a mean girl.
With each podcast, I'll interview people who have a humorous work story to share. Along the way, I'll offer tidbits of advice to help you make sense of your own office nonsense. Don't worry, no careers were harmed in making Not Suitable for Work. Names and places may have been changed to protect the not so innocent. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Working in advertising isn't all fun and games. As a junior advertising account executive, nothing can be more unnerving than presenting to a room of senior executives. Or driving in a car with your boss and colleagues for 6 hours every single week. Not to mention the first time you have to give someone on your team constructive feedback. Words of wisdom come easy upon reflection, but when you're living it, it seems like everything is do or die. One bad presentation or driving faux pas can be a career-limiting move. Our guest on today's show shares tales and tips from his 20-year career in advertising and what he's learning today from his conversations with millennials.
When I started working, we wore ties every day but Friday. And Friday you could wear jeans, and that was like a big
Well,
big
didn't it
deal.
start with khakis? It was like,
yeah, right.
First it was like,
right.
oh, you can wear khakis.
Right.
And then then you got to move to jeans. Yeah,
right.
It's great.
Right. We didn't have computers. Like, I remember the first time I ever sent an email. And, it's been actually, frankly, inspiring to like spend so much time around, these 22-year-olds. Because they just come at life from a completely different perspective. And it's not that one is right or wrong, but I will say that I appreciate sort of the boot camp that I went through, at a pretty young age. I mean, I started, so back in the day, the companies came down to your university, you interviewed with them, and then you took a job and, started the summer after you graduated. So, I was 21 years old when I started. And, one of the things that really stands out in my mind is, I worked on a client. I worked in advertising and marketing for my whole career. And, I worked on a client, and I remember that we would have to present business plans or marketing plans through several levels of senior executives at this company, culminating with me at 22 presenting to the CEO of like one of the largest and most well-known companies in America.
And so to set the stage for this,
yeah,
for the listeners here, like those rooms, could you just describe what that room looked like for a moment?
It was the Starship Enterprise. Like, you couldn't believe how many people, you couldn't believe that there were conference room tables that could seat 30, 40 people, all in typically like a horseshoe.
Yep.
You were presenting on an overhead projector. So for those of you under the age of 30, that was like you printed on a clear piece of
acetate. They were acetates. Yeah.
And then a light magnified it and projected it on the wall. And you could write on it. And I remember one of the funny things about these presentations. So you had to do this presentation so many times. And the clients always wanted to present the fun marketing ideas, so the agency people always had to present the business stuff, and I didn't have an MBA, but it was like I had to learn really quickly what the language was, how to present, again, to very senior level people and field their questions.
Yeah, and it's their business, so you had to know their business, right?
Right, and they knew it far better than I did. But the thing was, is you do it so many times that you would forget whether you'd said that already. And we would do these games where you'd see how many presidents' names you could incorporate into the presentation without the audience knowing. Or they would throw you a word, like I remember I got bouquet. And I had to give this presentation, and somehow I had to fit in the word bouquet. And I remember.
And this is like from your agency colleagues, right? Like
No, it was client and
the
agency.
client
They were
and
in on
agency are
it
kind of
too.
like feeding this into you. Okay, great. So
And the
everyone's
client
in on
threw a
it.
bouquet
Great.
at me.
All right.
So I said, as one kid in a focus group said, this product is a bouquet of fruit flavors. So I said that, and then like the CEO goes, kids say the funniest things, don't they? And I'm like, they do. But you know, I remember thinking like, on that piece of business, there were some wildly talented people who couldn't present well, that didn't succeed well in that business. And, you know, I had a boss at the time, and he said, like, the 3 key things to a presentation is mastery. You've got to know your stuff.
Yep.
Humanity. You've got to connect with people and see human. You don't want to look like a robot up there. And presence.
Wow.
Like, you've got to be able to command a room.
Yeah.
And the last is probably the most important. And, you know, I think having gone through that at a really young age and, you know, honing those skills, like humor was always like super high risk, but really, really high reward. And I remember one time I had this graph and the business had been going down, and then the business shot up because of like some new product news or something. I'm not sure what it was. But I remember writing on the acetate, like presenting the chart and then writing on the acetate. Now, I'd also like to comment, note that both the client, the brand manager, and myself started here, and I axed right when the business started to go through the roof. And I remember ending it by saying, coincidence? Perhaps. Like everybody started laughing. But I mean, it was kind of unfortunate because people that wasn't really in their wheelhouse ended up probably moving on to other pieces of business where it wasn't really that critical.
Well, humor's tough when you're presenting in front of a room, as you noted, right?
I bombed plenty of times, and there's nothing like making a joke and looking at a room full of people who, you know, are just stone-faced.
Yeah.
And they know that you blew it. So it is.
And what do you do though?
Right.
You just
You
kind
gotta
of
keep
move
going.
on. You just like
Yeah,
go
like-
on to you can't get phased by it. You just have to keep moving on.
You got to keep going. And I count myself as a pretty impressive, that I can present pretty well. But I remember I was leading a workshop a couple years ago in Suwon, which is right outside of Seoul. It's like
Okay.
an hour, 2 hours outside of Seoul. And it was tables, maybe 100 people, maybe 150 people, I can't remember. And there was a front table, and every single person at the table was sleeping, which really takes the wind out of you. I mean,
What
it's
do you
like-
do though?
Well-
I've presented when I've seen people yawning, and I'm like, oh, come on, really? Like,
Well, you
so-
think it can't get worse, and I was ignoring it. Like, I wasn't going to say anything. These are senior level clients, obviously in another country, so there's cultural differences as well, and I'm sure language barriers as well. But they were all sleeping. I didn't do anything, and then one guy started really snoring loud. Which was a problem because then he started waking up the other people at the table. And it was less distracting when they were all sleeping, but now they were all waking up. And it was a struggle. That was a real struggle. But anyway, so I look back like fondly on that period of time where I gained a lot. I did gain a lot of skills. I mean, it was like boot camp.
Yeah.
I mean, we worked late nights. We worked every single weekend, and you just did it.
Yeah.
And you know, I sense a little bit from some of these, some of these college students that I'm, working with.
Today's college students.
Yeah, that, they don't intend, and I hope they don't have to, and I don't think that's necessarily how, I mean, a lot of startups, I think, operate like that, but, they thought it was a really refreshing idea to, like, go get a job at a company. Like, they hadn't even really thought that.
Wow.
They know that most of my career has been international, so they would, like, ask me, like, well, I want to graduate and go work internationally. And I would say to them, that's fantastic. I love that you want to go work international, but for a company to pay you, an American, to come over and work there, you've got to have some skills and some experience behind your belt that makes it worth it for them. They hadn't really thought about that before, and I said to them, a lot of these people want to go start their own business. I said, you know what? I said, I wish I had had the moxie at that age to go start a business. I mean, I really, truly do. I wish I had it at this age. But, I said, you don't want to go work at a company and be their marketing director right out of college. Like, you want to go work for someone that's worked in marketing that can teach you and teach you, like, not what you'd learn in school, but, how to read and write professionally and how to, how to think differently and different tools that you might be able to take with you. And I think that I honestly believe that there's a real value to having gone through that. And I just was encouraging them to think about, like if you're working at a company and you're the smartest person in the room, quit. Go get a job where you're surrounded by people who are much smarter than you, which is what I did. I mean, I felt like everybody I worked with was smarter than I was, and I loved that about that. And that's what you want to be doing once you graduate. Like, you don't want to be the boss right out of college. You want to be working for a really, really good boss because they'll teach you stuff.
That's great. Yeah. That's it's really interesting to hear that, because I think a lot of I think there's this I can do it. I already have everything that I need to be able to do it, and I think it's good to be out there thinking about, all right, like what else do I need? Who else do I need to learn from to kind of build up those skills, so that when you do go and do it, you can also be the most successful at it.
Yeah. And I mean, as I said, like what I really like about millennials is that they're learners, and they wanted to hear what I had to say, even if they're going to take a very different path than me. They were like really, I think they really liked talking to someone who had experience and was giving them some advice. And I wasn't presented as like, this is the only way to do it.
Yeah.
But I think it opened up their eyes a little bit to thinking, a little bit differently about it. I mean, one of the things that came to mind was, we would have a 3-hour car trip to the client, a 3-hour car trip back, and often you were with some really senior people. And
so how many people would be in the car? Would just be 2 of you, or
sometimes it'd be 2 people
in these car trips.
Well, and sometimes that was stressful. If it was just you and the group creative director, I mean, I would think of things to talk about before we got in the car, because I'd be so otherwise it was gonna be so awkward. But a lot of times it was like a car full of
people,
5
right?
or 6 people. And but I mean, that gave you opportunity to be around someone that had been in the business for so long, that had really interesting perspectives about work and life, and and if you had a big group of people in the car, we would, there'd be games we would play. I mean, it was like you really got to, you got to really spend quality time with these people.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of great camaraderie that was happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is another thing that, going out and starting your own business or being entrepreneurial can be really lonely. And I think there was sort of a sense of camaraderie that, made the job, that much more interesting.
Yeah.
But I remember, just mentioning group creative directors. So one of the things that I think was the most difficult thing was at this ad agency was we would have these creative review committees. It was called the CRC. And you'd walk in these conference rooms that maybe had 25 people sitting around the table. And as a junior level person, you sat against the wall. And then the creatives would present all the creative. And then the group creative director would then call on people to comment on the creative. And without fail, and almost as a tradition, he would call in the junior person in the room. So now you've just looked at all this creative work. You're 21, 22 years old. And if you say the wrong thing in that room, you could potentially ruin your career. Because if the whole creative team doesn't like you, they will move you to another business, but then you've got a reputation at the creative. It's a one-way street out the door.
Sounds like very pressure
so
filled.
super, super high pressure situation. But again, I mean, I had a really great boss at the time. I wish I could mention his name. And he said to me, here's my one piece of advice. No one in that room wants to hear you comment on every piece of creative that was showing. He said, pick something you like and talk about it. And I thought that was the best strategy, I mean, because there were 10 people who were going to end up commenting in the meeting, and certainly they didn't want the junior level people going through it piece by piece, which was a common mistake people would make.
Yeah.
And, and I thought that was, and I know, since then I've learned that, if the first comment in a meeting is positive, the meeting usually ends on a positive note. And if the first comment is negative, statistically, the meeting tends to end on a negative note. So for lots of reasons, that was a really, really good strategy.
So so that's a great, do you think that also just applies even outside of that, like that creative review committee situation?
Yes.
Like, have you found even in your work now that you do, that focusing on, the good, in either what other people have to say or their work is the best? Do you still abide by that approach?
It's a daily challenge for me. I live on the dark side. It is, but I do. Yeah, I actually, as I've gotten older, I think the one thing that I've seen that's changed is that I really do look at the positive side of things. But I remember, like, I worked in London for a long time, and I was at a industry dinner and sat next to the head creative of the hottest shop at the time in London, and I was working at not the hottest shop. And, and I said, how do you do it? How do you guys come up with these amazing ideas? And he said to me, the difference between your company and my company is you have way more resources than I do. You have so much more creative resource than I have at my company. It's like amazing. But the difference is that when someone presents an idea at your company, everybody tears it down. They criticize it. They find out what's wrong with it, or they talk about how to improve it. And he goes, at our company, we treat every single idea like a new butterfly that we want to like help foster and nurture to bring that idea to life. And we all work to make the ideas better. And I've never forgotten that, because I think it's like a good, it's like a good lesson that, that's really how you want to approach life, how you want to approach a business meeting. Where are the good ideas, and how can you build on those?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. And it also sounds like it's also, having some fun along the way, right? Would you say that's another key
absolutely.
for
me
for your
personally,
success and your longevity has been just to also really enjoy what you're doing and kind of bring fun and
like I'm married to someone who is a medical professional, and he's he doesn't love what he does, but he'll always do that. And I can't imagine having gone through life not loving what I'm doing. And I'm sure I complained about it at the time, but when I look back on it, like, work's always been a pretty positive, part of my life. And I don't think I could have done a job for a really long time. I worked at the same company for 20 years. And I don't think I could have done that if I wasn't having fun along the way. It's great. So funny. This was one funny story that didn't happen to me, but we were talking about,
Let's hear it.
We're talking about these car rides with senior level creatives, and a good friend was driving, and like we knew where the best McDonald's was, like which exit, where you can get fresh popcorn, like, because we did it every week, sometimes twice a week.
Isn't that crazy when you think about like which is the best McDonald's?
Yes, exactly.
But it was true.
Yeah, we did. And they had stopped at McDonald's, and because we're like city folk, they all got in a different line, and we're gonna, like, whoever got to the counter first was gonna order. Which they did, and then everyone else in the restaurant got angry at them. So they basically got chased out of the restaurant, out of the McDonald's, and then they're in the car, and my colleague, who was my contemporary, was driving, and the senior creative was sitting in the passenger seat, in the front seat, and a truck cut them off, and my colleague slammed on the brakes, and she said, and I just watched this Big Mac tumble slowly, landing open face on this senior creative's purple suede stiletto pumps, just special sauce all over the car. And that's like one of my favorite favorite driving
How
stories.
do you recover from that? I mean, other than
and not like the friendliest not the friendliest person, at least on the surface. But the travel, so in the winter you were always going through snowstorms. And so I had this person who worked for me, and she called me up, and she's like, I'm between this exit. I was in Chicago, and she goes, I'm between this exit and this exit, and I've run off the road. I'm in a snowbank. And I'm like, okay, give me the information. She goes, I'm in a small white car. She's a small white car in a snowbank. So she got help. So the next week, I'm like, okay, we absolutely need to take the train up. The weather's terrible. It was a 3 hour train ride. And the other little subtext going on here was this person was really, really talented, but she wore these like bows on top of her head. And I don't mean like a hair bow. I mean like a Minnie Mouse bow.
A big bow. Okay.
Like Rosemary from the Dick Van Dyke Show. And my bosses are like, she doesn't have as much credibility with the client. I think like you need to have a little talk to her about more professional dress. And I was like, and I
so they're talking about like kind of like a kind of a teaching moment as a manager. That'll be it.
And I was so uncomfortable having this conversation, and I think sort of maybe probably wasn't clear enough, because we had the little chat, and then she showed up at the train station the next day with the bow perched right on top of her head. And I was like, I don't think I did a very good job with that chat. So we get on the train, and we're sitting in custom class, which is like nothing, but it was the first car, and you got like a free orange juice and a newspaper, and it was slightly better than the rest of the train, but not much better. And about 30 minutes before we get to the station at the client, the train hits something.
Okay.
The car becomes completely engulfed in flames, like white flames. The car's full of black smoke. The windows start cracking. People are screaming.
Yeah.
And like at the moment in my life where I would have thought, having grown up Catholic, that I would have been like either saying the Our Father or like final repent of, just like doing something, I like looked up. And I looked at this person, and I just, at the moment I'm dying, I just thought, I cannot believe you wore that bow. I just talked to you about it yesterday. And it turned out that the train, this propane tanker on the ice had slid down this hill onto the track, and the train hit it. And because the conductor kept the train moving, we actually ended up moving through the fire.
Wow.
And no one in the train was killed.
Wow.
I mean, really amazing. And we got on a bus, and we went to the client.
Of course, because you can't miss the meeting.
And we presented the creative, and people are making jokes about the fact we smelled like kerosene, because we did. We like smelled like this oily smoke, and that was the one. That was probably my closest near death experience, all in the line of work though. Wow. And we sold the copy, which was the most important part, wasn't it?
And so you came back a hero. It's like you finished the job. Any other final words to share before we?
Well, I'll tell you one other funny story. So like maybe a year after I started, this is in the days when you had big, beautiful offices with windows, and you didn't start out there. I was in a cube, but one of my younger brothers was coming to visit me in the office, and my boss was out of town, and he had this corner office that overlooked the river and the Wrigley building. I mean, it was spectacular. And I went in there, and I put all my family photos in there. And one of my friends, she went out to get my brother, acting like she was my secretary, which she wasn't. I don't even think I had an administrative assistant. She goes out and she goes, "Oh, I'll take you back to see Mr. Baldino." And he's like completely blown away. Then she brings him into this office. I'm sitting in this office with all of our family photos around it. And he was absolutely shocked. I mean, I'll never forget his face. He was just completely stunned. And then like at one point she comes in and interrupts us and said, "We've got that $5 million NBC deal we need you to sign off on before the end of the day." I mean, they totally worked this. And this went on, like, I never told him the truth for like 2 years. And then one time we were like all making a Christmas toast, and like in the middle of my toast, I said, I think we were all like saying what we wished for in the year. And I said, I just wish Matt, my brother Matt, he was at the table, was smart enough to know that there was no chance I was sitting in that office 6 months after I started. And oh my gosh, he was completely shocked. So.
It's great.
Yeah.
So it also sounds like it was talk about camaraderie and kind of a fun environment.
Everybody.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. I mean, people played friendly jokes on each other, but everybody, I think for the most part, respected each other and had fun. But yeah, it was a fun start.
Great. All right.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure, Dan.
Again, I've got everyone in my family will download it, so that's at least 20 something. But
maybe we'll have you back to share another story.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Good to
see you. Danny continues to speak in front of audiences across the globe, sharing his insights and war stories to the next generation of marketing professionals. If you want more Not Suitable for Work or have a work story to tell, be sure to follow us on Facebook at Not Suitable for Work. You can find our podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. I'm Peter C. Diamond. You can follow me on Twitter at Peter C. Diamond. Not Suitable for Work is produced by Matt Cunningham at Truthful Enthusiasm. Get your story online with truthfulenthusiasm.com. Until next time,